As World War II drew to a close, East met West on the banks of Germany's Elbe River. Soviet and American soldiers shared smiles and handshakes days before the Nazi surrender. The agreements of the Allied leaders at Yalta and later at Potsdam promised democracy and self-determination for Eastern Europe, but the spirit of wartime cooperation quickly faded. The Soviet Union tightened its post-war grip on Eastern Europe. Promises of free elections were broken, protests ignored. The Red Army stood as the strongest military force on the continent. The bulk of the Allied armies had gone home. In 1948, the Berlin Airlift began. The Soviets had blockaded the city and choked off its overland lifelines. The West realized a military counterforce was needed. On April 4th, 1949, NATO was founded. 12 leaders from Western Europe, the United States, and Canada met in Washington and signed the North Atlantic Treaty. U.S. President Harry Truman said the goal of NATO was peace, not war.
Men with courage and vision can still determine their own destiny. They can choose slavery or freedom, war or peace. I have no doubt which they will choose.
Exactly 10 years after the end of World War II, German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer led his country into the alliance. German forces were urgently needed to bolster NATO defenses against a possible Soviet invasion. In 1966, French President Charles de Gaulle delivered a blow to NATO unity, pulling France from NATO's integrated military command. De Gaulle could not tolerate what he saw as American and British domination of the alliance. This decision stood until 2009, when it was reversed by President Nicolas Sarkozy. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. German reunification came 1 year later. The Warsaw Pact, NATO's great potential Cold War adversary, was dissolved. Communist governments in Eastern Europe were overthrown, and the Soviet Union ceased to exist. In the early 1990s, NATO searched for a new mission. It found one, first enforcing a UN-backed arms embargo on former Yugoslavia. But the mission soon expanded operations to stop the growing carnage and violence erupting there. In 1993, NATO began Operation Deny Flight, enforcing a no-fly zone over Bosnia-Herzegovina. The operation resulted in the first shots fired in anger by NATO forces. The next year, NATO launched a wider-scale air campaign against the Bosnian Serb military. In an exclusive interview with RFERL, former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright credits the operations with helping to end the Bosnian War.
What we were seeing was massive ethnic cleansing in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the question was, how would we deal with it? And it was not an easy decision to take NATO to war, but it was the first time that really happened, and it turned it around. Once NATO really got into Bosnia, it made all the difference.
March of 1999 began with celebrations of NATO enlargement. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic became the first former Warsaw Pact countries to join. It was a happy day for the three nations, but on March 24th came this announcement from NATO Secretary General Javier Solana.
All efforts to achieve a negotiated political solution to the Kosovo crisis have failed, and no alternative is open but to take military action.
NATO began a bombing campaign, unprecedented in scope, against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. The aim was to stop violence by Serb security forces and paramilitaries against Kosovo's ethnic Albanian population. By June, the alliance had achieved its goal, and international forces moved into the province. Albright explained to RFERL why the job fell to NATO.
For us, it was very important that it was a NATO action because it did make it multilateral and did have the support the 16 countries at the time, to in fact undertake a mission where force was used.
September 11th, 2001. Terrorists carried out their well-planned suicide attacks against the United States using commercial airliners as weapons. Nearly 3,000 people died, including citizens from more than 90 countries. That evening, NATO Secretary General George Robertson expressed shock and outrage, and he offered help.
At this critical moment, the United States can rely on its 18 allies in North America and Europe for both assistance and for support. NATO solidarity remains the essence of our alliance.
The next day, NATO allies invoked Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty for the first time in NATO history. With proof that the 9/11 attacks were directed from abroad, they could be considered an armed attack on all NATO nations. All were authorized to give military assistance. NATO took up command of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan in 2003, another new role. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander in Europe says that right now there's no accurate way to tell how well the mission against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda is going. He also says NATO allies could commit more troops, but won't for political reasons. As NATO joined the war on terror, its ranks were bolstered by 7 new members. U.S. President George W. Bush welcomed them at a White House ceremony in March 2004. But the expansion of NATO to Russia's borders is viewed as a threat in Moscow. It is being cited as one reason for a massive rearmament program. But U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, says NATO's mission is misunderstood and its leaders should do a better job explaining it. In an interview at RFERL's Prague headquarters, he said the alliance should have a big role in international crisis management.
NATO needs to play a proactive role in helping deal with crises around the world, to helping societies deal with the globalized security challenges such as terrorism, violent extremism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, failed states and failed governance.
NATO leaders now face challenges unforeseen when the alliance was formed 60 years ago. An uncertain mission in Afghanistan, an angry resurgent Russia in place of the Soviet Union, and growing economic and political instability around the globe. As the alliance continues its mission in the 21st century, it will again have to prove its relevance and resolve in a rapidly changing and dangerous world.